The point of today is to kind of just help educate and share some of our learnings and what we're seeing in the world of AI search, and how we're helping other marketing teams basically adapt to those changes. This is by no means a sales pitch, just to help share some of the current data as the landscape and answer any questions that you have as you potentially consider it going forward. So excited to kind of briefly walk through it. Before I do so, a little bit of background about Athena and where we come from, just for guidance. Of course, today, intro Athena, primarily talk about the search landscape of 2025 and 2025 six or 26, and then go through a little bit about the Athena platform, and then wrap up with any questions and really do primarily focus on Q&A, because I find that this is definitely a place that people have a lot of questions and a deck just won't cover it all. So want to make sure that we leave most of the time today for conversations and questions. So really briefly about Athena, we are an agentic AI startup in the in the financial district of San Francisco, really on the kind of the cutting edge of a lot of this technology. Our specialty in the space is the technicality of what we understand and how we understand the underlying technology. Andrew, our founder and CEO, was previously at Google on their search info acquisition team, specifically as a product manager for the underlying technology for how Gemini AI Overview and AI Mode would find sources for its prompt responses. So it's a very core element of GEO as a whole. And so that advantage really helps us. And of course, he's the only member of the Google team that has left that team. And of course, it was to start Athena. So that's briefly about us. It's mostly to flavor just the level of data intensity, the level that we take data and the seriousness of it, because it empowers so much of the decisions and the things that we talk about today. Of course, this is it is a global thing, and the phenomenon of such, and there's lots of great logos, but we'll digress from these. Let me briefly just talk about the state of AI and the evolution of the search. So, historically, for the past 30 years of the internet, and the monopoly and duopoly of Google, and primarily, right? We all got very comfortable with the 10 blue links. There, of course, we understood the SEO algorithm. SEO becomes an industry and things of that nature. But with the advent of ChatGPT and its socialization across, consumers of all different types, it has progressed well beyond that, right? And so what we're starting to see is the transition of search moving out of Google and into the LLMs. Now, it's right now, the expert estimates are that it's about 30% of all search has moved purely into the LLMs, or large language models, roughly that being and containing the Geminis, the ChatGPTs of the words, or really the buzz one right now being Anthropic's Claude, based on all of those fun things happening for them across the country. Now, the challenge in this positioning and moving, and that 30% was, by the way, large enough to that's how the main reason that Google was able to get out of their monopolistic lawsuit with the US government most recently. So it is fundamental that is approaching them. And so the problem with this is that it's not a controlled software algorithm, right? It is an AI that basically does its own pattern recognition and creates an answer. And not only does it create an answer, it does not create the same answer twice. It is like a human telling a story, or me giving this walkthrough, right? It's a little bit different every single time. And so you're trying to understand the flavor in which that comes out. In that black box. So understanding how it's being, if you're showing up, and things of that nature, right? The old joke used to be in the world of search engine optimization used to be, where do things go to die? The second page of Google, right? Now it's either you exist or you don't exist in the consumer or your customers, your lead, your prospects knowledge base, because AI didn't surface you. And so that's how things are changing. And better to just kind of brief you in all of those elements regarding kind of how agentic search is happening, right? By a brief raise of hands or maybe a reaction on the bottom of the screen here, has anyone utilized like Amazon's Rufus to get suggestions on any type of consumer purchases at this point, or utilized the AI search to for anything today?
Mhm.
Amy,
Mhm.
wonderful. And so that's kind of the shift that is happening. And so the goal here is to understand how this information is getting aggregated, and that way you can make sure that your winery is appearing, right? Um, it's the there's a couple different verticals, of course, and everyone is different. And the wine industry is definitely interesting because, as I have actually personally helped my father, who is leveraging the Athena platform, it's been very interesting to see the source material for a lot of the answers and recommendations inside of the LLMs. I can share from a lot of the data that we're seeing. Vivino has a very strong weighting in the LLMs because of the consumer reports and ratings, and some of these other places versus Wine Spectator and Berserker, or some of these other, and or maybe some of even the paid for private subscriptions to Galoni's site or something like that. Less are not as influential because they're hidden behind paywalls that the LLMs cannot crawl, access, or utilize. So it's this fascinating dynamic. Of course, every industry is different regarding the state of AI search, where these AIs are pulling this information from, to provide it to customers. you know the other thing to understand about AI search, as it changes from the historic SEO search, or Google search, is that it the LLMs consume the entire internet, and things are all weighted. So whether it's Reddit or Vivino, or whether it's one of these other sources, everything is consumed. So it really impacts your brand, your PR, the content marketing, all of these different aspects of traditional marketing organizations have to play a role and work together to really create, brand engineer, if you will, their presence in AI search. You know,
Grant, can I jump
please,
in with a question actually?
please. I would love to make this interaction. I would love to just
Yeah,
start having questions. Don't worry, please.
I'm gonna take you up on that. Take it to heart. Do you think that, so have you seen already so far that there's a change of pace when it comes to paywalls? Are, because of the weighted search that you're speaking about, Grant,
Hmm.
um, are you finding that paywalls are coming down already?
Um, I'm not It's starting to be conversations that we're seeing. We're starting to see publications change it, right? We're starting to see the LLMs pay to have access to content and utilize content and have licensing rights. So those things are starting to change. But I would also at the same time say that there is still a predominant preference for publicly available information.
Hmm.
So there is a little bit of a movement there, but it is primarily the fully free content that is on the internet that the LLMs are utilizing for information.
I wonder what the alternative would be. You know, certainly even paywalls are able to be overcome, right?
Right,
And
exactly. And so that's what some of the people are doing, is they're creating these basically invisible websites to users, and using like these hidden markdown files and some of the more technical web development things to basically create the information that is somewhat public to the LLMs to access and utilize. But at the same time, they a lot of those paywalls are designed to, they want to be recommended as an authoritative source. So what they're trying to do is push information about that, but they're not trying to give up their IP. and they'll trying to sell the IP. So it's a very interesting dynamic right now that publications are interacting with these LLMs models on the consumption of the information. So it's a paradigm shift that has not fully played itself out. It's going to be very interesting. There's some interesting precedent being set in the past year or so. Um, but both sides are holding pretty firm on their positioning, and they are in direct conflict with each other. Um, so it will be very interesting to see um, that perspective. And I think in a lot of ways, the LLMs will have the leverage in the conversation outside of a very few set of publications.
Yeah. Aaron also dropped a question into the
Oh,
Q&A. And Aaron, I don't know
I
if
did
you
not.
want to take yourself off mute and ask your question. Um, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Kathy. I wanted to know if the shift from SEO to GEO or AEO means that written content from places like Reddit, Substack, LinkedIn, and Threads will become more important than TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram.
It's a great question. On as a whole, as of today, absolutely. Reddit is the number one source of across almost every single one of the LLMs when it comes to source material for answers. Um, Especially when it comes to like branded questions and comparisons and looking for sentiment around how your brand is being described. A lot of that is being driven out of your Reddit reviews and things of that nature. YouTube is actually also one of the largest sources of information currently in the LLMs, which is being surprising because what people should understand about the YouTube is that it's actually primarily the transcript. It's not the LLMs are not consuming the video content itself. It is purely the spoken word of the conversation that is being interpreted from the LLMs. Um, there are some small industries in which uh, we do see that some of the other social media sources are influential. But I would very much say that it's predominantly the YouTube and Reddits of the world. In some more B2B type sales and businesses, I would say LinkedIn is also valuable. Um, but the TikTok and Instagrams of the world are less influential. But that's also why, as a business, we do offer, those free AI audits of your visibility, so you can start to see what are the most influential for your business and for your category, because it does change so dramatically.
Mm, cool. Thanks, Grant, for,
Absolutely.
Thank you
yeah.
for answering.
Any other questions at this time?
Yeah, Robert has a question. Robert, you want to take yourself off mute?
Sure, thank you. So, the big brands don't need to be found. They already have brand equity in these LLMs and, Google search and
Hmm.
everything. So they don't need to be found. But it's everybody else that needs to compete for that being found and doing this geo and AEO work. Unless I'm just misunderstanding what the opportunity is here. But, the big brands have an advantage and the algorithms will favor them in every case, won't they?
Yes and no, right? Because if you think about it, the brands will have a lot of positivity, but they'll also have a lot of negativity. So there is a level of disruptors paradise in this, but also uniqueness sells. And so when you're looking at the thought process behind your blog or things like that, the creative, having the unique perspective that makes your wine different in the beginning is always quite critical in that conversation. So yes, the big brands that have been able to historically invest in their domain authority and SEO and blog and have created more content naturally will become more successful in some of those capacities or have an edge at the beginning. But there is still plenty of opportunity for the smaller brand, especially depending on how you brand engineer it, right? Being, becoming that exclusive regional artisanal organic, biofarmed, all of those types of things that you can build your brand around, and creating a lot of content around like leading in class processes and things of that nature can still help differentiate yourself you're just going to be focused on a subset of questions rather than, best $10 bottle red wine. It depends on what types of questions you want to gear yourself to be in the answer for. So it's also partly on you as you set as you and take out on this endeavor when you define the prompt universe and ecosystem in which you want your brand to be associated with.
Cool.
I saw another hand raised, but I didn't catch the name. And
Andrea had a question. She had a follow-up question regarding the YouTube and Reddit. Do the LLMs weight the content with engagement more highly, or are they just pulling it?
Yeah, great question. So there is a little bit around the engagement, but the truth of the nature is that these LLMs are really like super smart 5-year-olds. Um, they're lazy. And so what they're really trying to do is pattern recognize based on everything from like URL slugs but really often we see the biggest diversion on whether or not your contents get cited based on the title. They're looking for titles that answer the question that's been asked. And often we've even seen sometimes where the YouTube article is being, or the YouTube is being cited, but we can tell based on how they do the citation that they didn't even actually look at the transcript. They solely added that piece of content as a source because of the title matching the question. This was evidenced in September, although that's now feeling like 6 months ago. But OpenAI released a paper where basically they were doing a study and they caught that their LLM was lying to them and falsely reported that it did certain checks in these processes that it did not do. And they asked the LLM, "Why did you lie to us?" And they said, "Because I thought that's what the answer you wanted."
Mm.
Right. And
Mm.
so that's really what I mean when I say it's a super smart 5-year-old, right? It's like when you get your child in trouble and then the next thing they're just trying to give you the answer that they want rather than the truth. And so in some of those capacities, that same impact applies to this LLM search.
Interesting. Grant, thanks for being flexible about the questions that are coming
Oh,
in.
please. I'd much rather have it that way.
I love it. So please keep dropping your questions into the Q&A. In the meantime, I think we've answered the ones that have been asked so far. So please go ahead. You're on the SEO, not geo.
Yeah,
Side.
absolutely. Let me see. This is giving me a warning. Can you all see my screen and changing it? Because it's saying it was paused for a second. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Okay, wonderful. Well, this is going to get a little bit, not technical, but potentially a little bit confusing. So, want to briefly explain some of the fundamental differences between SEO and GEO. So, in the SEO world, because of the nature of Google's monopoly, right? Everyone started to play that game, Google's game. And so it was very algorithmic and it was deterministic because of that algorithm. So exactly when you ask that question about, well, how much does engagement matter? It does matter, right? But it doesn't matter the way it used to matter. Right. And so the deterministic model has kind of gone away. It's now a probabilistic model. There's so many additional variables that the LLMs are looking at because they're not actually, they're not actually looking at these statistics. They're pattern recognizing, right? The LLM doesn't know the difference between, any language. It just knows zeros and ones and pattern recognition. And so the idea is you have to understand that they're not actually thinking. And so there's a much more larger variable probabilistic outcome that's at play here than this kind of one-dimensional ranking system that historically has prevailed. And so that's when we look at this idea of ranking plus sentiment. And if we also think about the age of evolution, right, the previously technology has moved much slower, although even technology previously was so fast. When we look at the innovation, I can tell you now that the innovation that is happening inside of these inside of these technology companies now, especially utilizing AI, is the fastest it's ever been, and it's insane the amount of output that software engineers are able to do, but also that these LLMs are adapting on a regular basis. Historically, because these models and updates change so slowly, you had storage platforms like the SEMrush or Ahref that made their phenomenal businesses based off of capturing this data and then reselling it at scale, right? And they went through the labor intensive aspect of gathering the data and then therefore would sell it out, but at least it would stay consistent. In today's day, the LLMs are consistently changing their weights where you have to basically go to a continuous monitoring strategy just so you can stay on top of the signals. Recently, we've seen a lot of data indicating that in the past 3 weeks alone, basically all of the LLMs in almost very sequential order, but also independently, have all decided that Wikipedia is no longer citable. And Wikipedia citations across all of our customers in their prompting has fallen, 30+%. We're still working on some of these numbers, and that'll be come out in our next State of AI search report that you all got. But it's these trends that we're looking at as far as the macro landscape and how things are changing. Perfect. Well, continuing.
Grant,
So,
actually, Robert, could you unmute and elaborate on your question for Grant?
Yes,
please.
Grant, we just updated our platform from 4 to 5. And of course, reasoning has been kind of the improvement that we're seeing in this new one. Are you distinguishing thinking from reasoning in the form of LLM efforts?
Elaborate on your question, Robert, just so I can clarify so I answer it correctly, because there's a little bit of nuance here. You said you're taking your website from 4 to 5?
I'm sorry. Our AI agent is moving from 4 mini to 5 mini on OpenAI's
Ah,
platform. That's what I meant. I'm sorry. I just
no,
assumed.
absolutely.
Yeah.
No. So the model to model, and when you're talking about many, I'm assuming you're referring to chat, right? Chat
Yes.
GPT. So with that, each of the models do have their own different preferences as far as that behavior goes. And those models, so that's the other thing, right? Is like when I'm talking about the amount of the nature of these complexities, if you add in the fact of people using different models, it gets much more significant. But regarding your question, Robert, was regarding the change in going from 4 mini to 5 mini as it relates to its preferences and sources and its adaptations and maturity.
Well, it's really what is the difference in terms of how it. You say it doesn't, that AI doesn't think. You said that these LLMs don't think, but now they're adding a
Mm-hmm.
reasoning layer to the LLMs, and that's really the basis of the question. Maybe the question's not
Right.
fully formed, but
So
that's my thought.
reasoning, what reasoning is really allowing is that instead of asking a singular question to come to an answer, they're essentially breaking that your question into many, many, many smaller questions, answering those smaller questions, and then recognizing the top answer. So the parameter of these models has grown significantly in that aspect. But at the end of the day, like it is all to these LLMs, everything like there are no neurons that fire, right? But it is thinking in the way that they're breaking down your individual question, kind of like I just did, and asking follow-up questions basically to clarify. But they're doing that internally to come to a consensus agreement inside of itself as far as the answer to provide you. Um, but for example, like if you look at like Robert, right, and your name alone, the LLM doesn't know that like the way that we traditionally learn that O follows R, right? It just knows that when it starts to see this pattern, that most likely follows R. So it's kind of a semantic difference, but often just a helpful because there's not this sentient element of them, right? It's all that pattern recognition in that regard. But it almost comes off to the point because of the parameters of these LLMs. And I apologize that this is getting too technical, but
Yeah, we come out of the rabbit hole. I don't want to draw people in our rabbit hole here. I was interested in your
yeah,
response.
yeah, of course. All righty. Anything else? Otherwise, I'll go back here. So really, when we're looking at the, traditionally KPIs were all around rankings because it was very algorithmic. It was, okay, I'm one, you're two, and they're three. Um, but now it's because of that probabilistic nature. It's really these ratios and percentages. It's much closer to a baseball batting average rather than a ranking, a clear ranking system in that regard. And so these kinds of a lot of these key KPIs that you want to be looking at and considering is it has have changed dramatically. And so we could get into Athena and what we do, but I don't want this to be a sales pitch. So I'll wrap it up there as far as kind of the lay of the land. I'm happy to provide some more statistics and observations of what we're seeing in the data that's not, written here in the presentation. But I want to carve out time for additional questions on the matter, right? Realistically, the way to kind of go on back to one of my first points today is that the LLM search is the fundamental shift. 30% of search now happens purely in the LLMs. That leaves 70% of the search still in Google. But at this point, especially if you're on that handy dandy mobile device, our data is showing that AI overviews, which is an LLM model, is answering over 90% of Google searches. So if you think about it in that capacity, LLM search is now impacting 95% of search today. And so understanding and being aware of your presence, your visibility, your sentiment is incredibly crucial.
Grant, can I jump in? And
Please.
I would love to, keep the conversation moving. Do you have, how do you advise,
Mm,
especially wine brands? So
yeah.
within Athena HQ,
Mhm.
that's your category, correct? Is wineries, beverage alcohol?
I'm pretty agnostic. I work with teams across many different levels, but I do work with food and alcohol, with a lot of different B2C and beverage and consumptive type companies across whether it's in store or direct to consumer and different things of that nature. I do support and advise many of those different businesses.
Yeah, can you maybe talk us through a case study? Talk us through like a hands-on project that you've worked on that would be particularly relevant to the audience in the room. I know that,
Yeah, absolutely.
and just
Um,
full disclosure, I have not prepped Grant for that question, so give
yeah,
him some grace around
yeah,
responding.
absolutely. Well, I think especially in the crowded place, the example I'm going to use today is unfortunately not a winery. But what it was is we were working with an organization in the, the basically they were trying to help recategorize um, instant Mexican food, authentic Mexican, traditional Mexican food from the grocery store, right? They are trying to rebuild the category from old Del Paso to a more traditional and authentic varietal. And so when we first started working together, the key element that we were realizing was, as Robert pointed out, they had zero visibility because of the long-standing brand nature of some of these historic players. And so we worked very carefully to craft their brand engineer their content toward some of these modern trends that we knew would be getting picked up. Seed oil free. We started looking at and promoting, their beef tallow production of some of these things because those are the traditional methodologies because seed oils didn't exist. And so creating these cohesive alignments around it to increase their visibility quite dramatically, right? We're talking 5xing their visibility and citation as sources for information, right? It's very difficult within their space because recipes LLMs do not like to quote recipes because they quote unquote know recipes, right? So they just tell you how to make the food. They don't actually give you recipes from third-party providers. And so what we did with them is we crafted their narrative and brand engineered their content in a way to really focus and shine within their specific deliverables to their personas and things of that nature. Um, I'm just going to high level leave it there, but I'm Kathy. I can tell that you have some questions as follow up to that.
Just in terms of how do you make authenticity findable? I feel like that's with the Old El Paso example, Grant, that's really,
Hmm.
I feel like that's exactly what they needed to do, right? Um,
Hmm.
so take kind of extrapolating the ideas and your learning from there, especially to wine brands, or maybe for Reese or for some of the other brands,
Yeah.
that have crossed your path.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of it comes down to discussing, the logic and the process in which you're producing or your objective is, right? Always framing your impetus or kind of your start. And so with them, it was always the framing of, well, my abuelita said,
Mhm.
right? And this idea of framing everything from the founder's vision and perception of the world through the eyes of being the way that he was raised, right? And that basic impetus really helped kind of shape it from that vision, right? Some people come at it from the perspective of health, or kind of traditional farming methodologies and things of that nature. That can be helpful, but always carrying those through lines in every piece of content that you publish from that very consistent view. And of course, remembering those things is super helpful because of the LLM's pattern recognition nature, right? They're looking for that consistency in your content and in your viewpoint and in their perception. So that way, when they reiterate it to your customer at the end of the search, it's critical to those elements. So you always want that to be really a part of your tone, the guidance of that content that you're producing or those partnerships that you are um, working with.
Hmm. Got it. Cool. Other questions from the audience? Please jump in.
So I hate to be dominating the conversation, but I have a question that's very, very tactical. So
Yeah.
Grant, I'm with my phone. I'm driving through the valley. I'm looking for a winery nearby, and normally what
Mm.
happens is I get a Google result says, "Here's the winery closest to you." How's the LLM going to deal with that? And are they going to give me a map? Where Google will definitely do that.
Yes. Robert, your question is very tactical because um, Google announced very recently, basically within the past, I think, 4 to 6 weeks. The weeks kind of blurred together for me, so my apologies on the imprecision there. But that Google Maps would now be utilizing Gemini, and that Gemini would be using Google Maps. And so IP address and all of those things will now play a significant factor in the results. So best, especially when you look at the idea of best winery near me, um, it's going to become incredibly important um, that you are producing and talking about, that you have content around your location, and those kinds of things as well, as far as how you stick up to your neighbors. So the LLMs, it is a more recent cutting edge trend, especially the predominantly the Google models that have historically have other apps in the suite that would be a part of that recommendation. But it will now start impacting wineries. Like if you did a winery near me search in Google Maps, the LLMs are going to start to influence that visibility as well, in that ranking at least.
And what about
Does that
my
answer your question, Robert?
It does. And what about my Google business listing, right? Which, is where a bunch of SEO happens. Is Gemini
Yep.
going to pick that up into the GEO platform as well?
Yep. Yep. your Google, especially within Google, your Google reviews and your business profile is definitely going to be critical. So making sure that that information that you have in that is once again packaged and complete is very helpful. But one thing to kind of frame all of this with is you always want to be producing your content in a question answer format, right? Because of the way that people are searching in the LLMs, you always want to respond in as if your title and your content is written as a response to the question. And that's always a helpful guidance. I know that's not fully on the same vein and topic of what Robert was just asking me, but something that's always super helpful to remember when you're thinking about your strategy is to think of it in this question response nature because of my previous point regarding the LLMs and their focus on the laziness, right? And just getting, okay, here's the question. What aligns with this question, this answer?
Cool. Thank you, Robert, for the questions. There's another
Absolutely.
one. There's another one, Aaron, from Aaron, and you're welcome to take yourself off mute and talk about it yourself, Aaron. But effectively, Grant, it's about authenticity. Is it
Hmm.
good to be unique and niche, because AI outputs and automation is producing more generic content? Or is there a hard line you're seeing between those two sides? Aaron, did I capture that right?
You did, thank you. I'm actually launching something that's a bit weird, and I was noticing that, like accidentally when I was doing a series on LinkedIn, that my content was ranking, but it still seems really risky. So I just want to know, where the line is on weird.
Yeah.
You.
Uh, well, I won't directly answer the question, but I will say that uniqueness sells, right? Um, that's why I always encourage people, whatever makes your business different than the Joe Schmo next to you is something you always have to continuously push on in your narratives and of your content because when uniqueness sells because there the LLM is looking for an answer to the question, and as long as and because of the long tail detailed nature in which search is transforming within the LLMs, right? Google taught us for the past 20, 30 years to do a 3-word keyword search. And so everything was based on that 3-word keyword search. But now humans are being programmed to prompt engineer their questions. Best winery near me focusing on natural wine, natural orange wine in the blank blank region, right? And it's a very, very specific search that you want to make sure that you're showing up for. So, Aaron, I don't know if this answers your question around weird, but making sure that the information is granular can be very helpful. And so, the unfortunate aspect of it is that you want to create lots of different granular niches to the point where you put enough dots on a page that you create a painting, kind of an idea. But that specificity in the piece of content that you're creating or that narrative that you're pushing can be very helpful. But at the same time, it can pigeonhole you in the viewing of the LLMs. So it's always critical to not only focus on the weird, but having the weird be a shade of the picture or the painting that is your brand.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was noticing when I was it does answer my question. I was noticing when I was programming what I'm building because I'm curating content that when the LLM would generate, when I would allow it to generate content, it has very specific mentions that it prefers.
Yes, very much so. There are those preferences and that structure that it likes. Um, you know, the short nature, the short answer to how to hack together your content to make sure that you're adapting to it is making sure that you right now the LLMs prefer a pretty keyword stuffed URL, right? When you're building out the title, the LLMs really do like an exhaustive title that answers the question. If they're getting the question, best 5 tasting rooms in Healdsburg, There's a California bias to my statements just because I'm from San Francisco. But like when you do one of these searches, you want to then respond in kind um, to those elements. And then when you write the content itself, always put basically the TLDR or the summary at the top, answer the question thoroughly through the bottom, and then put your clarifying FAQ questions at the bottom. And that is the general recipe for success when building content for the LLMs.
What you're describing sounds like, remember the old days of the word cloud, sounds like an FAQ cloud.
In many capacities, it is not far off. I have often been, jokingly spoke with some folks that today's GEO was SEO 20 years ago. It's just the rate of which it's maturing is much, much faster. And it's a little bit more complex because of that probabilistic nature of some of these elements. But yes, to your question and to your point, those FAQ clouds, listicles, some of these other elements are quite influential to these LLMs and getting it branded. But at the end of the day, it's really about that brand engineering as a holistic whole that can do it and creating the content that can produce that answers the question so that way it can be used as source material for the LLMs will in the end lead to your visibility. And then to Aaron's point, a little bit of uniqueness, being a little bit of a contrarian, pointing out where you think other people have gone wrong. Those kinds of edges will help your content stand out from others.
Yeah, I want to jump to another question, Grant, from Lauren. And Lauren, you're happy to take yourself off mute and address it yourself. But earlier, Grant, you had mentioned that the LLMs are not actually watching video. They're reading the transcripts. So, Aaron, I don't know if that helps, but Lauren's question, Grant, was, are you seeing much difference between video and text for how the LLMs create rank?
Hard to answer this question because they're really not absorbing the video content at all.
Mm.
It is much more of the written content today because the video content is so storage intensive from the question set. So as of today, it's very much focused on the transcript. I will expect that to change over time, but as of today, it's about the transcript and then the following commentary and social interaction that it gets below.
Cool.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if it's okay, that jogged my memory about something.
Please.
I know that we're talking about how the LLM is looking for text, but interestingly, on like the communication platforms, there's videos coming out, and I know it's a sensitive subject, but Iran, sorry, produced a bunch of Lego videos, right? And it's very buzzy and it's very unique. And so like I started thinking about how video is making content accessible to people who normally it wouldn't be accessible to, like Legos on its own is kind of a weird thing. So is there a place for video for storytelling in this strategy?
It's a great question. I think it comes to the divide, Aaron, in a lot of ways of figuring out, and this is the naturally the hard part about it, which is how do you find the right balance between marketing for humans and marketing for the LLMs? And there is this kind of duality of the day because it's no longer really just humans. And so it's hard for me to give you an exact answer because I wouldn't want to dissuade you from your gut feeling and visual aspect of it. But if you have a good storyline and a video that's catching, and you can embed it with information that is self-serving on its own, then it can be a super powerful combination for both.
Thank you. That
Cool.
definitely answers the question. And I think the YouTube thing is something I haven't previously thought of. So thank you for the tip.
Absolutely.
Grant,
All
Andrea
right.
had a question. Andrea, do you want to jump in and ask your question?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Excellent. I was curious, you've talked about how quickly the model is evolving and how often it
Mhm.
changes from certain things being prioritized over others. What would you recommend for those of us who aren't in this every day the way you are to keep up on that, not to the level that you need to, but to the level that we might want to as we prioritize different things within our organizations?
Great question. Um, well, I don't want to sound too salesy, but I would say follow Athena on LinkedIn. Um, we are all about publishing the data and the trends, and so we're always pushing out content about the things that we're seeing, being super helpful. And we're one of the things I think we're going to be starting here soon is like just kind of like a newsletter, not about products or features or anything that we're doing, but specifically just sharing and trying to expand on these things. We quarterly produce these AI state of search reports, which is also something super powerful as well that I would recommend. But unfortunately, the LLMs themselves are not pushing out and talking about how their models are changing weights, right? Because they don't care. And so it's an aggregator of data like ourselves that have the innate ability to talk about it. And there are some different other LinkedIn communities um, where this is being a driver of conversation for folks.
Great question. Thank you, Andrea. Jessica, I noticed that you had taken yourself off mute as well. Did you want to ask a question?
Nope, completely accidental.
Okay. Okay, cool. We've only got a couple more minutes left. But Robert, was there something else you wanted to say?
Yes, Grant, we've created an AI agent for winery websites specifically. And
Okay.
so that's going to live on the website. It gets rid of the sameness because winery websites, not meaning to be insulting to the agencies who create them, are fundamentally the same. That differentiation you're talking about is really important. But websites in the future will have agents on them that will communicate with the users, right? And so, how will the LLMs learn how to communicate with dedicated agents on dedicated web properties?
It's a great question. This idea of the future where it's agents to agents speaking is not a fairy tale, and is very much a communication, right? So making sure that as you, from a technical perspective, that you can layer in a level of MCP between your chat and the agent that you're having internally on your side, and the ability for the LLMs to interact with those is going to be helpful. But as of right now, the LLMs are not sending agents; they're just sending bots to crawl and consume. And so until that dynamic changes, um, the you still need to have stagnant content that can be learned off of.
I hope you didn't mean stagnant, but static.
Yes, sorry, static. My apologies. Yes.
All right, everybody. Wow. I don't see any more questions or anybody else off mute. But Grant, you just jumped right in there. Thank you very
Hopefully that
much.
was the intended purpose. My apologies for
No,
if it was not.
absolutely. Absolutely. We, as as the group knows, we had been talking with David, and we're with your colleague, and expecting him to join in today. But the fact that you just stepped in and are speaking our language, that's really helpful. So thank you. Nadia,
Absolutely.
No,
anything?
just echoing that. Thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Yeah, I appreciate it. There were so many pithy takeaways that we can definitely summarize or have summarized in our AI transcript. Not the video, but the transcript. Cool.
And
Grant,
we'll be
how would we
sending,
get in?
sorry, go
Go ahead,
ahead,
Nadia.
Kathy. We'll send, like we usually do, the link to the presentation as well as the survey, just so we can keep on top of what topics everyone's wanting to see and how we're doing with providing the content that everyone's looking for.
Yeah. And Grant, in addition to following AthenaHQ on LinkedIn, how can people
Yep.
reach out to you directly?
Yep, absolutely. Well, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. Just I am p.grant.harvey or p.grant.harvey there. And then if you're trying to reach out to me directly via email or you'd like to interact with getting a free AI audit of any domain, we are only accessing publicly available information and understanding how the LLMs are perceiving you. So we're happy to do that for anyone that reaches out for either your brand or if you're curious about another brand and doing some competitive intelligence, also available. So just reach out to me directly at grant at athenahq.ai. Athenahq.ai is our company domain and website, and I'm just Grant at. So feel free to reach out directly to me there as well.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your questions as well. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye bye.